MSW Media. We'd like to welcome our new sponsor, HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. Go to HelloFresh.com/cleanup16 and use code cleanup16 for 16 free meals plus free shipping.
The rule of law is not just some lawyer's turn of phrase. It is the very foundation of our democracy. The essence of the rule of law is that like cases are treated alike. That there not be one rule for Democrats and another for Republicans, one rule for the powerful, another for the powerless, one rule for the rich and another for the poor, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity. To serve as Attorney General at this critical time is a calling I am honored and eager to answer.
So now it's cleanup on aisle 45 time. And for a long while yet, it is going to be cleanup on aisle 45.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 127 of Cleanup on Aisle 45. It's Wednesday, June 28th, 2023. I'm your host, Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Strzok. Today we'll discuss the latest in the Peter Navarro contempt case and the George Santos bail drama, and of course the John Durham congressional testimony from last Thursday.
I can't read that sentence without laughing. We'll also go over new sanctions for Rudy Giuliani, and trouble for Jim Jordan, as a new Twitter video shows that the platform was not silencing conservative voices.
Yeah, shockingly enough.
Yeah, I know. Whoa. Every single one of his investigations is totally falling apart. And that the Supreme Court is allowing a lawsuit in the Ohio State University wrestling scandal to go forward. But first, I want to take a minute to thank our new patrons this week. Patrons, you make the world go round. You make this whole show happen. So a big shout out to Wanda Broner, Alexis B., Jennifer Moore, Robert Kramer from the Netherlands, very cool, Hunter, Vicky Kindberg, Howard Beyer, R.L. Bose, R. Chaw, Pretty Fly Polly Sy, love it, Debbie Sheldon, Connie Ziegler, Pam Herrick, Joanne McWaters, J.A. Bombard, Scott Link, Susan Bridge, Jennifer Malinowski, Ed B., Ann Marin, and Opal's new vagina is already sick and tired of MAGA nonsense. Welcome to the club, Opal. Thank you again so much. We cannot thank you enough for being patrons. If you are a patron at the $2 per regular episode level, you'll get that free bonus episode every week. You'll get twice as many episodes. You can sign up at patreon.com/aisle45pod. That's AISLE45POD. So, Pete, did you have a restful weekend?
No, it was interesting how things suddenly, with global international affairs pop up without warning. And all the more reason when you do have global uncertainty that you want a calm, level-headed mind like Donald Trump in the White House to tweet his way through it in the kind of seat of his pants, talk about how big his red button is compared to Kim Jong-un's. But no, it was not restful, but I think it was absolutely reassuring, both in terms of both the president and national security team we have leading our country, as well as just another reminder of what a risk to national security would be. And yet another reason that there's a risk to national security by having Donald Trump return to the White House. So I don't know. What about you? You get any rest?
Just hats off to y'all, voters. You did this. The reason that Biden is there now is because of you. And I mean, a lot of people are arguing on Twitter, none of this would have happened if Trump were in the White House. Well, yeah, because Trump would have handed half of Ukraine over to Russia and shoved, what was his name, Yanukovych in charge as part of his quote unquote peace plan that he was putting together with that one guy that I can't ever remember his name. But so I guess to be fair, there might not have been this potential civil war / coup, but you wouldn't have a sovereign Ukraine either.
Right, exactly. If you're adherent to the surrender as a means of global, peace, there's always an option to just give in to the whatever despot is threatening, whether it's, Putin in Ukraine or Kim Jong-un shooting missiles over South Korea and Japan, you can always roll over. That's an option, no doubt. And so I don't, if anything, this weekend just highlighted the need for competence and the importance of competence and expertise, particularly when it comes to matters of national security. And at the end of the day, having a team that is seasoned, that is experienced, that is mature enough to understand what is going, to look for options, to understand that, not being actively involved, to, sitting back and monitoring carefully, to, note that this is an internal Russian matter, to not escalate the situation is every single time something like this happens. Again, just a reminder, and I hope a reminder for everyone about what it is that the presidency does. I mean, we complain about, kind of the day-to-day operations and the abhorrent immigration policies, but when it comes to things like national security and war and, nominating justices, certainly to the Supreme Court and elsewhere, that have a real tangible and long-lasting impact on our lives, this is just a huge reminder on the national security front why it's important to have real leadership in the White House.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about with regard to national security. Sue Gordon was a guest on Deadline White House last Friday and talked about how the number of stars on that wall that Trump basically defiled by speaking in front of it. At the CIA, I think it's the CIA, correct?
Yep.
Has doubled, and with the way that that Donald's handling national security information, national defense information, is just abhorrent when it comes to protecting the men and women who have spent their entire lives, taking care to gather this intelligence for us, to protect us and to protect our national security and our country and our allies, and to just defile it the way that he has. It was very emotional. So hats off to Sue Gordon, hats off to Nicole Wallace for the segment. But that just also really struck me and also made me very thankful to everyone listening to this show, because I know you voted and I know you brought people with you, and it's because of you that we are now much safer. So thank you. Speaking of people who are not much safer, let's talk about the Ohio State University wrestling team from the 70s to the 90s and what's going on there. And I know that this is sort of ancillary to what we talk about, but Jim Jordan is involved in this. So, Pete, what's happening with that case?
Yeah, so on Monday, the Supreme Court left in place a decision which allows more than 230 men, 230, to sue Ohio State University over decades-old sexual abuse by a university doctor, the late Richard Strauss. Now, Ohio State had urged the court to review a ruling by the 6th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals that revived lawsuits that had been dismissed, and the men who sued are among hundreds of former student-athletes and other alumni who say they were abused by Strauss, who worked at the school, again, as you indicated, for 2 decades, from 1978 until 1998. The various folks who sued say university officials failed to stop him despite repeated complaints raised as early as the late 70s, so just at the time he started working there. Many of them alleged Strauss abused them during required physicals and other medical exams at the campus athletic facilities, a student health center, his home, and an off-campus clinic. Now, Strauss killed himself in 2005 at the age of 67. In 2018, Ohio State announced an investigation into Strauss's abuse and the university's conduct. It has apologized to his victims and reached over $60 million in settlements with at least 296 people. But the university eventually sought to have the remaining unsettled cases dismissed, arguing that the time limit for the claims had long passed. Now, how does Jim Jordan factor into all this? You may remember that, Jim Jordan was a former coach on the Ohio State wrestling team, and it came to light certainly in the 2020 time period, both through a variety of his former wrestlers, as well as those wrestlers both speaking to the media, as well as testimony under oath to Ohio State legislators that they had gone to Jim Jordan. Multiple wrestlers had gone to Jim Jordan and said, hey, look, that, Strauss was abusing me. I went in for, a physical, for medical treatment. One of the wrestlers went in and said, he had a problem with his thumb, and Strauss tried to pull down his pants, and he said he jumped off the exam table and said, what are you doing? The problem's with my thumb. But then, where it gets really particularly just, heinous is, in addition to this apparent multiple individuals saying that they notified Jim Jordan about the abuse, that one of these, Adam DiSabato, told Ohio State legislators in February 2022 that Jordan called him in 2018 and asked him to contradict statements by his brother, who had publicly alleged that Jordan knew about Strauss's abuse back when he worked for Ohio State. And this is a quote from the testimony. Jim Jordan called me crying, groveling, on the 4th of July, begging me to go against my brother, begging me, crying for half an hour. That's the kind of cover-ups that's going on here, which is what DiSabato told legislators, again, under oath. And then in response, as you might expect, Jim Jordan spent, engaged a lobbying firm, spent a extraordinary amount of money and, to try and, quiet and dispel and get these allegations off the table. But when you look at this activity, and particularly these lawsuits that are now going to continue, there's certainly a question about, to the extent that the university had culpability, when you had multiple people, multiple wrestlers, telling the administration, telling their coaches, telling specifically, allegedly, Jim Jordan, that this abuse was going on, and yet nothing, what the question first is, what did Jim Jordan do or not do with regard to that alleged abuse? Did he say anything? Did he take any measures to stop it? And if not, why not? And part of the purpose of those lawsuits, presumably if they continue, will be, through the process of discovery, finding out, are there any records whatsoever of this behavior being reported? And again, if not, why not? But this is not, it truly is something I don't know how, given Jordan's leadership position, these extraordinarily serious allegations have somehow just kind of gone away. Given the GOP's focus on groomers and pedophiles. Yeah, give me a fucking break. Groomers and pedophiles? Okay, let's talk about these 200 plus wrestlers, many of whom were under Jim Jordan's responsibility and care as a coach, being groomed, being subjected allegedly to the actions of a pederast, and Jim Jordan did fucking nothing? Or maybe he did. Maybe that's all going to come out. Maybe he will produce in depositions and records of him writing and telling the Ohio State University leadership that this is going on, and going to the local police department on campus and going to the local Columbus Police Department and saying, there is sexual abuse going on. I'm asking you to look into it. Maybe that's there, Allison. Maybe Jim Jordan has a nice, tidy record of this responsible behavior, of him standing up to sexual abuse, of him standing up to grooming behavior. Maybe that's all coming. But thanks to the Supreme Court, I think we're going to get a lot more information about whether or not that exists.
Yeah, I'm and as per usual, the Supreme Court didn't really say anything. They're just not taking up the case, which leaves it to the lower court decision, as you said. So I think we're gonna learn a lot more. I really doubt any of that happened. I really doubt that Jim Jordan went anywhere and said anything. Otherwise, why would you call crying for a half an hour to lie about your brother's abuse? Just stunning.
Yeah, it truly is abhorrent. And we'll see. I am curious to find out, does Ohio State then look and dig deep in its pocket? This is, whatever it is or is not for Jim Jordan, certainly for Ohio State University, it's also a terrible look. And so the question is, do they, seek to settle, and what price, or, are some of these, are some of these plaintiffs unwilling to settle or not? Yeah, we'll see. But, again, this is, we're talking about Jim Jordan, but I first and foremost need to focus on the victims. Yes. And just the way that upended their lives, the trauma it undoubtedly caused them, how it's still with them today, how they've had to fight to even see these lawsuits through, but all the ripples through the community, through Ohio State, through everything else. So, it's just, I am glad that these will be able to continue and hopefully serve as some measure of both justice and resolution for all these alleged victims.
Yes, hats off to the 230 men that are going forward with this. It's very brave. In the face of, just all the red tape and the legal stuff and the probably political pressure, just really, truly an act of courage. So hats off to them. We have a lot more to get to, but we're going to take a quick break right here. Everybody stick around. We'll be right back. Hey everybody, it's AG from Cleanup on Aisle 45. I'm excited to tell you how HelloFresh and their meal delivery service made my time in the kitchen simpler, easier and more delicious. Now I've got a newfound passion for home cooking I never had before. I used to burn Jell-O, but HelloFresh makes it so easy, and I get to save time and money. HelloFresh is your recipe for success. Take a bite out of something new with 40 recipes to choose from weekly. Go to HelloFresh.com/cleanup16 and use code cleanup16 for 16 free meals plus free shipping. HelloFresh is less expensive than ordering takeout and far more convenient than going to the grocery store. And if you're stuck in a recipe rut, you can always take a bite out of something new with the 40 recipes I was talking about that you can choose from every week. You'll also get farm-to-table quality with every HelloFresh box. They use seasonal ingredients, picked at peak ripeness, that travel from farm to your doorstep in less than 7 days. That guarantees you'll get fresh flavor in every single bite. It's so good, you can really taste the difference. All their meals are delicious. Lately, I've been raving about their sweet Thai chili beef lettuce wraps. Oh my God, they're so good. I love the sweet chili sauce and the fresh cucumbers, radishes, carrots, and onions. It's colorful, it's crispy, it's delicious. You need to try it. So go to HelloFresh.com/cleanup16 and use code cleanup16 for 16 free meals plus free shipping. You'll be glad you did. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. All right. Let's talk, Pete, about another Pete. Let's talk about Pete Navarro. And this is different from the other Pete Navarro case we've been discussing, where the Department of Justice sued him to hand over his Proton emails under the Presidential Records Act, and he still hasn't done it. No. This is about Peter Navarro being held in criminal contempt for defying his January 6th committee subpoena. Pete Navarro wants to be able to tell the jury that the former president told him to defy the congressional subpoena. But on Wednesday, in a hearing, Judge Emmett Mehta didn't sound like he was having it. He hasn't ruled yet, but didn't sound good. He didn't rule immediately, at least, on the issue about the jury, which is one of the largest outstanding questions ahead of the trial, which is set for September 5th. Oddly enough, the same day Ken Paxton's impeachment trial begins in Texas. So lots going on September. And I love it, especially if it's later in the summer. Now, Mehta, as we know, is a judge for the U.S. District Court of the District of Columbia, said the issue will likely come out one of two ways: an evidentiary hearing ahead of trial, where the judge will rule on any evidence Navarro presents about Trump's directions about how to respond to the subpoena, or letting Navarro make those same arguments at trial. Now, time and time again, they've asked for this evidence, and time again, Navarro has said, I don't have any. Oh, I just had a private conversation with the president, and he said that. Will the president sign a declaration? No. Will he come in and testify? No. Like, it's just very interesting. But there are other considerations here. If Trump did tell him to defy a subpoena, that could play a role in potentially whether this evidence is let in or not. Now, Mehta did rule that Navarro could not dismiss the case entirely over his claims of executive privilege. Now, guess who's representing Pete Navarro?
Yeah, one of the attorney to the MAGA stars, right?
Yes. Yep. Stanley Woodward. He's also representing Kash Patel, Walt Nauta. I mean, this guy is everywhere. He's probably already banked millions from the Save America PAC. But Woodward argued that Pete is not an attorney and shouldn't be expected to navigate the complicated questions about when executive privilege and testimonial immunity apply. Mehta pushed back. I wish he would have said, yeah, but you're his lawyer. That's what you do. But Mehta pushed back on the argument, saying there is no harassment defense because he's a White House official. So sorry. But unless Mehta rules on the privilege issue in the interim, Navarro will next head to court on August 30th for a pretrial hearing to set out the details of the trial, which again begins, 6 days after that on September 5th.
Yeah, and there's no better exemplar of the privileged white male entitlement coming into contact with the criminal justice system than Peter Navarro. Whether he is screaming about the affront of being handcuffed, or the way that he was subjected to being in a cell, or having to go and appear before a judge, or actually having to understand perhaps his obligations under subpoenas and actually respond to them like every other single American citizen in our nation. His continuing outrage that he should have to follow these rules is something to behold. I have
well,
not.
Well, he lied about it too, right? He was like, they tackled me and knocked me down, and
right,
took
and
my
I was in
phone
leg
and,
irons, and it's like,
and
no,
they
you
made
weren't.
me
No, they
break
didn't.
rocks with a hammer.
No, they didn't,
Yeah,
Peter. No, they didn't, Peter. And I was chipping away at the salt and putting it on the back of the donkeys. And no, you weren't. No, you weren't. No, you weren't. It's just
the DOJ's like, we've got video here. Look,
it is the same. And in the female version of Marjorie Taylor Greene going to visit the January 6th defendants and saying these conditions are so terrible. Yes, which is what a lot of sort of people in favor of criminal justice reform have been saying for the past several generations about the state of the nation's incarceration system. So yes.
Jeffrey Clark had it worse. That he answered the door in no pants, and then he's like, "Can I put pants on?" And they're like, "No, you can't, because we got to go in." So he had to stand outside
right here,
in his
buddy.
chonies. But still, like, come on. I walked uphill both ways in the snow to my deposition. Okay, you know what? I'm done with you. It's going to be interesting to see how this turns out. It's going to be interesting to see how his proton mail thing turns out. And the whole thing about the other case with Pete Navarro that just blows my mind is that the DOJ didn't charge him with a violation of the Presidential Records Act. They didn't indict him or with contempt or obstruction or anything. They just sued him to get the stuff back. And he's complaining about that.
Yeah, I do wonder if he's the Republican version. Well, the non-family version of Donald Jr. Too dumb to collude sort of thing. If he hasn't been charged just because he is not entirely there. But it's not, given his behavior, given what he's facing. And again, we'll see. We'll see what his involvement was with. He's Mr. Green Bay Sweep, right? I mean, we'll see what comes out of Georgia. We'll see what comes out of Jack Smith. I don't know at the end of the day the centrality of what Peter Navarro did in the various January 6th scheming. I don't know how his behavior lines up against particular elements of a crime that would constitute a violation of federal or Georgia state law. But certainly Navarro was in the thick of a lot of that. So, Navarro's got these, kind of little, not small. I mean, they wouldn't be small for anybody, but for him, this may be potentially small beer compared to what is coming down the pike. But he's one of those, I don't know. If you ask me, like, who's the core group of people, particularly down in Georgia, I don't know that he's there. I don't know how central he is to what Jack Smith is looking at, but, he certainly was not some, innocent bystander who got wrapped up in some email with.
And if he did have discussions with members of Congress about delaying or the Green Bay Sweep, basically, he's waived any privilege that he could possibly have by talking about it openly on television. So, we'll see how all of this shakes out. He's in a lot of trouble, but right now it's just sort of ancillary, periphery kind of trouble. We'll see what happens with the rest of the January 6th investigation, which is still chugging along. Looks like it's coming to an end. All right. Speaking of people in trouble for January 6th and in Georgia, let's talk about Rudy. And I want to set this up with a piece by Jane Tim at NBC, something that came out this week. Ruby Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss were officially cleared by Georgia authorities on Tuesday. The investigation has taken this long to clear them of wrongdoing. You remember Ruby Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss. Shay testified at a January 6th hearing. I was 10 feet away from her watching her extremely harrowing story and watching the video of Ruby Freeman and what had happened to her after Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump accused them of ballot fraud in Georgia. Georgia State's election board has dismissed its year-long investigation into that alleged election fraud at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta. This was one of the points they harped on over and over again, the suitcase of ballots. They stopped counting. They pulled them out of the suitcase from under the table. Everybody remembers this. The fraud claims were, quote, unsubstantiated and found to have no merit, unquote. That's what the investigation concluded, reporting on the work of the FBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, and investigators from the Secretary of State's office vetting the alleged fraud. So this is in triplicate, investigation. Now, Trump and his ally, Rudy, repeated those claims that they had committed election fraud. Julie said Freeman and Moss were passing USB drives, quote, like vials of heroin or cocaine.
Yeah, little casual race baiting dog whistles from, sweaty Rudy. But yeah, go on, Rudy.
Yeah, during ballot counting. Moss later explained that her mother handed her a ginger mint. It wasn't a USB drive. It was a mint. And Rudy Giuliani was sanctioned. This is the news story, right? And this is what's great. He was just sanctioned because Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman have sued Rudy for defamation. And we've been covering this a bit, right? Rudy went into the judge and said, I can't afford to do discovery. I can't afford the software it takes to go through all of my documents and my electronic devices. And Judge Beryl Howell said, okay, prove it. Give me all your financials. And Rudy was like, no, wait a minute. And then a couple of things were filed under seal. And then bam, this week, Rudy Giuliani was sanctioned by Beryl Howell for failing to search for and return over records in the discovery of this lawsuit. Again, it's Beryl Howell. She ordered Giuliani to pay attorney's fees and costs associated with Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman's effort to force him to search for documents. Lawyers for the plaintiffs, former Georgia election workers Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, asked Howell to sanction Giuliani in April, accusing him of failing to fulfill basic obligations to turn over records as part of the lawsuit. So he's been sanctioned. We don't have a clear amount yet, but that is what's going on in Rudy land today. And did you see the Lev Parnas tweet? Lev Parnas is an interesting fellow, but he tweeted that sources tell him Rudy is pissed and angry and drinking heavily because of this lawsuit and his sanctions, and that he's going to be indicted. He's going to be indicted for January 6th. So that now, again, that's coming from Fraud Guarantees Lev Parnas. But
yeah, well,
I think you might know some people.
Drinking heavily. I mean, what's the deviation from the mean right there? Allegedly is maybe not so great. But you know what gets me about this, Allison? I mean, one, I'm willing to bet Rudy is going to come in with a filing saying I'm essentially a itinerant, destitute man without any financial wherewithal whatsoever to pay any of these sanctioned fees. So we'll see what actually comes out of pocket in terms of being produced for these legal fees. But what gets me about this, I mean, I think most of our listeners remember the testimony by Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss and their interviews and all the nonsense. What I think most people maybe didn't appreciate was the fact that they were being investigated. Again, the FBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, and investigators from the Georgia Secretary of State's office over the course of years were investigating them. Now, how much, whether or not they were, ever seriously under investigation, we're told, hey, we just need to interview. At the end of the day, I can tell you it doesn't matter. If you are just an election worker and her mom, and suddenly you have state, local, and federal authorities investigating your actions for years, I mean, come on. All because of what? All good old Rudy and Donald Trump and other allegations that led to this. And that, yes, did they have great lawyers? They certainly did. Or hopefully these lawyers either doing it pro bono or doing it in a way that both Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman aren't having to pay out of pocket. Neither of them are, super wealthy, independently connected to, powerful people to provide for legal defense. But it takes a toll on you. And this is, again, we don't talk about this in terms of the way that the judicial system was weaponized. But absolutely, when you look at the two of them, I mean, thank God it's finally done. And I am certain they're breathing a great deal more easily today than they were a week ago when this was still, as far as they knew, was ongoing. But it just goes to show the way that the judicial system was manipulated by Trump and his allies to go after people. Again, this isn't some well-known, this isn't like a nationally known appointed political enemy. This is a local poll worker.
Mm-hmm. Egregious. It's just absolutely egregious and racist, in my opinion. What do you think of the timing? Just a month and a half before we get charging decisions in Georgia, Jack Smith potentially wrapping up his January 6th investigation, because I assume that this report and this investigation of no basis and no findings for election fraud in Georgia will be added to the pile of evidence in both of those cases, most likely. And then also, I feel like a lot of times we see a lot of loose ends being tied up before indictments come out. And so I'm curious as to your thoughts on the timing here, or did it just take 2 years, or did they hurry up to finish before these indictments came out? It's probably just 2 independent investigations that just happened to be ended around the same time.
Yeah, I don't know why it took that long. And it's clear it's not necessarily the case that, the FBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, and the Secretary of State's office were all working together in some task force. These could have been different work, different investigations that were done and were all provided to the state election board. And so whether it took that long, it's a little disappointing that it did take that long. I'm not sure what it was that, needed until June of 2023 to resolve. But I think, what it tells me is if you're going to get money from Rudy, you better hurry up and do it, because if he comes down and gets indicted criminally by Fani Willis in about another month or so, he's not going to, the amount of money he's going to have to pony up to come and hire another legal team in Georgia to defend him there if he's indicted, and he's, according to Lev, drinking whatever liquid financial resources he has, he's converting it into like tangible alcoholic liquid beverages. You better hurry up and get that money, because I don't see how Rudy is one of those, when you look up like kind of the spiraling down in the dictionary, it's got, I think, a photo or a picture of Rudy Giuliani right now.
The shame spiral.
Yeah, it's not, shame.
And I mean, these were state investigations, but the feds refused to even open a preliminary investigation back with BJ Pack and all that other stuff that was, going on. And the original Georgia guy was fired, U.S. Attorney's Office, and then BJ Pack took over, and BJ Pack's like, I'm still not going to do it, dude. And I'm assuming that they're all talking to and have spoken to Fani Willis and the special counsel as well. Yeah. But that Fed case, they were like, there's just not even predicate to open it. But Georgia wanted to go through, I guess, and take the 2 years to thoroughly investigate it, tie up all the loose ends, and come out right now and say no voter fraud, no wrongdoing.
Right. And it could be, we also need to keep in mind, it isn't certain that the FBI was ever investigating them, right? You may recall that Shay Moss reportedly, somebody showed up at her door trying to convince her to do or not do certain things, and that there may have been some investigation, again, not of her mother, but of the people who were trying to intimidate or otherwise coerce her. So, when you see them thanking the FBI, I think it's important to highlight, that doesn't mean the FBI was investigating them. It may very well be, and I think it's probably likely, that the FBI was investigating some of the things that were done to try and
Kanye West's
intimidate
publicist,
them. Yes.
And the Harrison Ford guy, the guy named Harrison Ford. Yeah. Exactly.
Those, if the FBI went out, and who knows, they may still be under investigation, either state or locally, but that investigation, those interviews, some summary of that investigation was provided to the state election board,
that's
which
a good
then they were
point,
able to
too.
use. So
that's a good point. That could have been like a full investigation of everything, and they're like, well, we've been done with Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman for a while. Let's announce they're off the hook while we keep going on looking at other stuff, because they haven't announced anybody else is off the hook.
Right. And so my point in saying that is just to highlight for folks, don't necessarily get mad at Georgia BI or the FBI, because we don't know. And in my opinion, again, I don't think it's likely that they were investigating Shay or Ruby. It is more likely, in my opinion, they were investigating the folks who were trying to intimidate and do bad things with regard to them. And they provided that information to the state election board. Now, why it took the state election board that long, maybe they were waiting, to your point, maybe the feds wanted to wait, or, Fani Willis of the DA's office asked them to wait until certain things and mileposts were crossed before they provided this information. But again, just the fact that they needed to wait this long to kind of get that resolution and that peace of mind that it's done is a little unfortunate. But it's done. So that's the good news. And again, we'll see. I do think we will see them come up again in a criminal context, but not at all as subjects, but certainly potentially as victims and folks who, there was a pattern of potentially intimidation or other, potentially illegal acts as part of this effort.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I sometimes think, like, where will we be in the news tomorrow? What about next week? What about next month? And what about next year? And then what about in 3 years? Like, I just try to picture that, how this all of it's going to unfold with the multiple different investigations into so many people. The documents case, 84 witnesses for the documents case. Imagine the January 6th case witness list. It's going to be massive. And so, we'll keep an eye on it for you. But we do have a few other things we want to cover today. We just have to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Stick around.
All right, welcome back, everybody. If you are a subscriber, you've heard us talk a little bit about Durham's testimony last night, but for everybody else, there's an interesting, yet again, under the category of every single thing Jim Jordan touches turns to shit. John Durham went before the House Judiciary Committee and testified last week, and the day before that, he went to the House Intelligence Committee and testified in a closed setting. And the results, Allison, I got to say, I'm troubled, and I've, thought about it and, spent the weekend kind of considering the sort of, as things settled, how they settled. And a couple of things really bother me. And, first, it's clear that, there was not anything there, right? This was a nothing burger. There was not any sort of deep state plot. There was not some sort of FBI, foreign government, U.S. intelligence community collusion. There was not some
You're
sort
not
of...
in Guantanamo, Pete. You're here with us today.
I'm not in Guantanamo. It is not, everybody from Hillary Clinton to Jake Sullivan to Jim Comey to Jim Clapper to John
Bruce
Brennan
Orr.
to Andy McCabe and Bruce Orr. We are all walking free as we record this. But what bothers me again and I've said this before on the show, John Durham was a very respected, good prosecutor. But what I don't understand, and what's really interesting, and I would recommend to everybody, if you haven't read it, Jonathan Chait in the New York Magazine has a really interesting article which talks about several just very basic, fundamental, factual things about Russia's attacks on the U.S. election in 2016 and the way those kind of interacted and overlapped with the Trump campaign and people within the Trump campaign, that in the testimony, it was clear that Durham didn't know. And I don't understand that.
Yeah, just to clarify, Durham was tasked with investigating the Russia investigation, of which he apparently doesn't know anything about after spending 4 years on it.
Yeah, and that's this wasn't a side note, right? This was not, oh, hey, look at, look at 1 through 10, and by the way, if you happen to have time, look at 11 through 14 as well. This was the core of his job.
Yeah, these weren't like, okay, so on page, 482 in the obstruction part with the dangling pardon for Cohen, can you tell me what day that he said that you're a rat fuck? And I'd have to have the Durham, or I'd have to have the Mueller report in front of me to be able to give you that information. Why do I remember it? Don't ask. But it wasn't stuff like that. It wasn't little ancillary bits and pieces. It was the core fucking issue. Go over some of the examples.
And this is what Chait does, because again, it's a typical circus where you've got each member gets 5 minutes. I think Matt Gaetz got 2 for whatever reason, but it is hard to sit down. Hard under any circumstances to listen to the damn circus. But what Chait does is a very good job of sort of boiling down these sort of core components and laying them out. He starts out with Eric Swalwell asking Durham about how Trump, quote, tried and concealed from the public a real estate deal he was seeking in Moscow. And to which Durham replied, I don't know anything about that. Well, I'm sorry, how in the hell can you not know what has been repeatedly identified, whether it's the Senate Intelligence committee report, whether it's public reporting, whether it's Michael Cohen himself saying, I was in Moscow and talking with people in Russia about a Trump Tower Moscow deal. At literally the same time on the campaign trail, Donald Trump was saying, I have no deals, I have no financial connections to Russia whatsoever. How can you not, quote, know anything about that?
I had a whole podcast about. Should I send him a link to the podcast?
Hopefully, I assume he is off to greener pastures and fishing off the bay in Connecticut or something. But it goes, and then Adam Schiff continues. And Schiff did a masterful job. I mean, he was just, you can tell he was a prosecutor. You can tell he knows his stuff when it comes to the Russian attacks on the 2016 elections and everything that followed. But Schiff just methodically, calmly went through all of these things with Durham. He asked him did the Russians release stolen information through cutouts? And Durham says, well, I'm not sure. And to which Schiff responded, well, the answer is yes. And then Durham said, in your mind, it's yes. No. In everybody's mind, it's yes.
Yeah, Schiff was like, look, we got WikiLeaks. We got Guccifer 2.0. We got, are you
DC
saying
leaks.
to me right now that there were not emails really hacked and released through cutouts? Is that what you're saying to me right now? As like, I'm looking at your stupid face. Like, it was unbelievable.
The Republican-led Senate Intel Committee said that the Russians stole the information and released it through the cutouts. The U.S. intelligence community has essentially, in as many words, confirmed that. Outside investigators have, forensic folks have confirmed that whether it's the DCCC or the DNC, that the Russians broke into this, they hacked and stole the material, and then it was released through all those entities. It is not in anybody's mind the case that the answer is yes.
Yeah, and he wasn't asking him, did Trump orchestrate it, or did the Republicans have anything to do with it? It was just, did Russia do this thing that we all know that they did? And what was interesting is that Burr was in charge of the committee, but then the DOJ under Barr opened an investigation into Burr for insider trading, and he had to step down from that committee, putting Marco Rubio in charge, who changed the whole summary, not the entire report of Volume 5, but the summary of the release of the report, to again downplay Russian interference. And I saw that in Durham's face when he was like, it was Marco Rubio, and it's like, you shut your mouth. You know what happened. You know why Burr was no longer in charge of that fucking committee. So anyway, that's just a little side part that I was a little especially upset about.
Yeah, and there's just time and time, and it keeps going. I mean, Schiff asked Durham, do you know, hey, hours after Trump publicly asked Russia to find Hillary's missing State Department emails and release them, literally said that on the campaign trail, and that within hours after that statement, Russian hackers made an attempt to hack Clinton emails? Durham replied, well, if that happened, I'm not aware of that. Well, it was in the Mueller report. And all these congressmen were asking your opinion about what Mueller did and what Mueller found, and you were responding as someone with great familiarity and categorizing something as reliable or not reliable and how much you respected Director Mueller and his work. But yet this, which was a key part of that report, not aware of that. When asked if Trump referred to the stolen emails more than 100 times on the campaign trail, Durham said, well, quote, I don't really read the newspapers and listen to the news, unquote. And then finally, when Schiff asked Durham, are you aware that Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, before he had to resign, passed on non-public polling data to Konstantin Kilimnik, who's a Russian intelligence agent? At the same time, Russia was conducting both the social media campaign and the release of stolen documents to help Trump. Durham said, well, you may be getting beyond the depth of my knowledge. That is the circumstance, right? Those are the things that are going on when that allegation from the Australian ambassador in London trickles into the FBI. And if you're trying to understand why the FBI responded the way it did, and you don't know about all of those things, that Trump is asking Russia to hack Hillary's emails and they then go and try and do it, when Trump is saying, I don't have financial connections to Russia, and Cohen is trying to set up a Trump Tower Moscow deals, when you're saying that, the campaign manager for Trump is taking non-public polling data and giving it to a Russian agent who then presumably is passing it to the Russian intelligence services, who are helping to seed disinformation in a way to help Trump and hurt Clinton.
Oh, yeah. He hopped on a plane and and ended up on Oleg Deripaska's boat.
If you don't know any of that, or you're arguing about the veracity of that, how in the hell can you make an informed judgment about what the FBI and the Department of Justice and the U.S. intelligence community did or didn't do? And if you were aware of that, if anything, the only criticism might be, why did you not do more sooner?
Yeah, right. Right.
I mean, for fuck's sake. I don't get at the end of the day, all of this, they were too lenient on, there was disparate treatment and there was confirmation bias. How can you look at all those facts and say there was confirmation bias? Mm-hmm. If anything, again, there was this investigation of Trump that the FBI was doing that nobody knew about until after the election. That's confirmation bias. That's trying to go out and get Trump. At the same time, these statements are being made about the investigation in Hillary Clinton.
That's what I was just going to say.
About the reopening of the investigation in Hillary Clinton. That's somehow confirmation bias. That's somehow taking it easy on Clinton and being overly too aggressive against Trump.
When the FBI announced the investigation into Clinton, but we didn't know Trump was under investigation. So
confirmation bias. Let's talk about confirmation bias. Let's talk about the felon George Papadopoulos. Let's talk about the felon Michael Flynn. Let's talk about the felon Roger Stone. Let's talk about the felon Paul Manafort. Let's talk about the felon Rick Gates. Confirmation bias? Go to hell. Come on. Compared to two aborted prosecutions of Sussman and Danchenko, confirmation bias my ass. I don't get it, and I probably never will. And I can't explain it. I think Bill Barr is a malicious man. I don't know that John Durham is, and I don't understand what's at play.
No, and my only question that goes in my head over and over again is, what do they have on John Durham? What do they have on John Durham? That's just how my mind works with this particular administration. I could be completely wrong, but I can't understand what would make him act that way either. Other than just maybe just fear. I really don't know. But I also Pete, we have to talk about some more embarrassing things for Jim Jordan. But before we do that, I just want to mention really quick, George Santos, they unsealed 2 of the 3 suretors. The third withdrew. And the 2 that were left were his dad and his aunt, I believe, a mail carrier and a house painter. Apparently, they didn't have the money or assets to guarantee the bond. And so I still have a lot of open questions about how the bond is guaranteed. If the guy, maybe the third person who withdrew was the person who could guarantee it, but there's also stuff about how there's no cash needed. But I don't know what happens if he doesn't show up. Who's on the hook for that bond? There's just still a lot of unanswered questions, and who that third person is, and why they are probably the ones that put up the assets, and how they're connected to Santos. So a lot of weird stuff floating around with this guy, but he's in a lot of fucking trouble. So
yeah, and he's not. I mean, even Kevin McCarthy was saying that, I think it was today, he gave an interview yesterday with Fox News folks saying, no, I'm not, I'm not going to back him. Somebody else is going to run and we're going to keep the seat. But, even McCarthy's cut him loose. But I'm with you. I don't nothing. There was not a breakdown of who paid how much when those names were released. The fact that the third person withdrew and is not named is certainly curious.
I just don't understand the whole bail system. Maybe it's probably the problem. If anybody knows, write into us, hello@MuellerSheWrote.com, and put bail in the subject line and tell me what I'm missing, because I don't understand why everything's just okay with this. So, all right, we have to take one more quick break, then we're going to come back with more trouble for Jim Jordan. Stick around. All right, everybody, welcome back. This is from Drew Harwell, The Washington Post. Twitter's current owner, Elon Musk, as we know, commissioned the Twitter files intended to reveal how the company had previously sought to, quash and squelch conservative speech. And the Republican-led committee in the House is working to build that case. The case that tech giants have been digitally weaponized against conservative ideas. But new video out this week, seen by the Washington Post, I should say, and other newly obtained internal Twitter records show that far from working to censor pro-Trump sentiment in the days from the Capitol riot, the company's leaders were intent on leaving it up, despite internal warnings that trouble was brewing. We heard a little taste of this when an anonymous Twitter employee testified at the January 6th hearings. But on January 5th, 2021, the day before the riot, the lawyers and specialists on Twitter's safety policy team, which is the team that sets rules about violent content, they were bracing for a day of brutality. Quote, I am very concerned about what happens tomorrow, especially given what we've been seeing. That's one member of the team, Annika Collier-Navaroli. She said on that video call. This is the video call, the details of which are being reported here in the Post for the first time. Quote, for months, we have been allowing folks to maintain and stay on the platform that they're locked and loaded, that they're ready to shoot people, that they're ready to commit violence. Some participants of the call pushed the company to adopt a tougher position, but a senior manager dismissed that idea, saying executives wanted them to take action against only the most flagrant rule violations, adding, we don't want to go too far. Ugh. Can you imagine being the person who fucking said that on January 5th? Quote, what if there's violence on the ground? Responded another team member in the Dublin office. Quote, we would take action, or do we have to wait for violence? Do we have to wait for someone getting shot? Somebody said. By the way, somebody got shot. Congressional Republicans, Trump supporters, and Musk allies have condemned the company for suspending Trump's account after the riot, saying its employees were too quick to punish the former president because of their liberal prejudice. But the records reveal a company that fought until the end bent over backwards to give some of Trump's most belligerent supporters the benefit of the doubt, even as its internal teams faced an overwhelming volume of tweets threatening retribution in line with Trump's lies that the election had been stolen. So this completely, as we know, but now we have video fucking evidence, cuts Jim Jordan's argument off at the knees that conservative voices were quashed and poor Donald Trump. And when we've learned during those same hearings, Chrissy Teigen, Trump called the Twitter to get them to take down the pussy ass bitch tweet from Chrissy Teigen. So it's always the fucking opposite of reality with Jim Jordan and his committees.
Yeah, of course it is. And, one, it's just another example of Trump getting the benefit of the doubt that nobody else would in the same situation. The constant playing up to the line and past the line and daring somebody to take action. And yet again, somebody being afraid of the backlash if they were to actually just enforce the rules. And the other thing, this isn't just brand new breaking information. The fact that, this was the core of, the so-called Twitter files, where Elon gave access to all the internal files to motherfucking Matt Taibbi and Mike Schellenberger, who went through and dug into all this malfeasance and the government trying to influence and tell Twitter what to do, and Twitter silencing people on the right, going as witnesses, as experts in front of Jim Jordan's committee and swearing under oath and testifying. Yet somehow all of this content, all of this information either wasn't provided them or somehow escaped their, attention, or wasn't seen, or maybe was ignored. But the fact of the matter is, this does nothing but expose what an utter grifting joke the Twitter files were for everybody involved. And I hope there is probably the 742nd asterisk next to the name of Matt Taibbi whenever he says or writes anything, that people can look back on his body of work and say, you grifting joke. How can you possibly expect anyone to take seriously for an instant anything you have to say ever again?
I remember Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Do you make more money now? Did you get quite a bit of money? Well, I spend more money now. Okay. All right. So you make more money now. Well, I spend more money now. Like, it was just, and he was so smug. He reminded me a lot of, you ever see, of course you have, the the testimony of one Corey Lewandowski, like just that smug asshole, like, that.
Right. And anybody, and he refused, I forget who asked him, refused to answer whether or not Russia had interfered in the 2016 elections. There are just some things that's like when you're being like, smarmy, and I forget exactly how the question was worded, but when you can be so certain about U.S. government malfeasance, yet being dragged with your feet and hands digging into the ground to try and get to the truth of what Russia was doing in the disinformation space and what Russia was doing trying to influence our elections in 2016, and not even willing to give an inch on that. It tells you in my mind all you need to know. It is not surprising in the least that's there. It's disappointing. I am surprised in, that Twitter, again, I would hope everybody taking what should be very hard looks at, did our actions contribute to the violence on January 6th? Anybody who might be thinking that now at Twitter, I'm sure, has long since been fired by Musk. But the reality is, from this information, yeah, sure looks like it. Is it going to take someone getting shot? Turns out, yep, sure did.
Yeah. Wow. And and I still remember that anonymous Twitter employee testifying to the January 6th committee to the same information. So I don't even know if this is something that any federal prosecutor or special counsel like Jack Smith would be looking into. But I'm wondering where all the Senate investigations are these days with Democrats. Like, why? I don't understand what the frick's going on.
Tell me about it. We're still fighting about whether something as basic as whether Harlan Crow, a private citizen, is actually subject to a judiciary subpoena or request before that to turn over business records. If we can't even get that far, asking him to do something, kind of in the weeds as this, I'd throw up my hands in despair that it's ever going to happen.
Yeah, true. All right. So lesson today, call your senators, tell them to investigate shit. They have subpoena power. They have majorities. Why aren't we doing it? We have a real hard Senate map in 2024. We're going to have a really hard time holding the Senate. So now's the time to get these investigations going. All right. Well, Pete, thank you very much. It's been another wonderful hour of Cleanup on Aisle 45. If you want to become a patron, go to patreon.com/aisle45pod. Do you have any final thoughts before we get out of here for the week? I mean, it's Monday. We dropped this Wednesday. Who knows what the fuck could happen on Tuesday?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I see that Eileen Cannon has issued a ruling without prejudice, meaning the government can go back, denying the fact that, or denying the government request to keep the names of all the individuals they don't want Trump discussing the case with, to keep them private. So, that's something I'm sure that
under seal.
Under seal, right, to not disclose it to the public. And I'm sure, you and Andy will have some more to discuss about it. But, I'm actually
okay with this ruling. I read the motion from Jay Bratt. He didn't explain why he wanted this filed with the court and under seal. And he conditioned the bond thing for Trump not being able to talk to these 84 witnesses. He conditioned that on the thing being able to be filed under seal, but he didn't explain why. And so Cannon dismissed without prejudice. They can refile. You need to explain to me why you want to file this with the court in the first place, and then why you want to file it under seal and why redactions don't work. Trump's going to get the list anyway. I mean, he's going to get the list of witnesses. It's not about that. It's just about whether or not they can get that bond condition that Trump's not allowed to speak to any of these 84 people. And I think if Bratt hadn't conditioned that on filing it under seal, we'd be in a different spot. But I will go, and that's, again, my little non-lawyer overview. I did look at some tweets from Bradley Moss, and we will have an expert on, and I'm going to talk to other experts about it before I fully formulate my opinion. But I do know that Eileen Cannon is a chaunch, so don't worry.
Yeah, your words, not mine. No, we'll see. I mean, I think it's like some of this is like, okay, DOJ. I mean, to the extent they should have done it and they didn't. Whether this is pro forma in most every other case, but it's not going to be in this one. I mean, I do not think this is the kind of thing that you can go to the 11th Circuit and say, see, she's being unreasonable, reassign it. But it is, I think, an indication that okay, you're going to have to, do the law like you're doing it.
For a third grader.
Yes. And so we'll see. And we'll see if they refile. There were like easily almost a dozen or so attorneys who filed appearances on the docket on behalf of media organizations to try and get access to information. So this is, again, to folks who think this is going to be, even with a request to have the trial pushed back to December, I have no expectation that it's going to happen by then.
No.
So, we'll see. But, more to come.
Spring at best. Maybe even after the election. All right. Yep, we're going to talk about that in the next episode of Jack, coming out this Sunday on MSW Media. All right, my friend, have a wonderful week. And everyone listening, have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for listening. Seriously, we can't thank you enough. I've been Allison Gill.
And I'm Pete Strzok.
And this is Cleanup on Aisle 45. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is written, researched, and produced by Allison Gill, with editing by Molly Hockey. Our art and logo design are by Joelle Reeder and Moxie Design Studios, and our music is composed and performed by Adam Orr. Cleanup on Aisle 45 is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, visit mswmedia.com. MSW Media.